When I first got started, I was challenged to do a small pole. I said, oh man, how is anybody going to make money doing this kind of little tiny pole about yay big?
Nice to meet you, Nathan. And is it Dorica? Is that how you pronounce your
Yes,
name? Or
Dorica, very
Dorica.
good. Yeah.
Just so you know a little bit about me, I used to teach secondary school science for 17 years, and I'm still certified to teach science and English as a second language. Right now, I teach math, engineering, and history at the Ohio State University, and occasionally STEM education over in the Department of Education. I teach first year engineering and design course, and last year we piloted a section where students design products for musicians and music educators. And so I recorded interviews for that. We had a music educator, a professional musician, instrument repairman, and we decided to expand it from music to music and visual and performing arts. And so I saw your artwork in Alaska, and it looks like I think I might have seen one of your son's totems as well in Juneau. Is that correct? That he
That's
has one
correct.
on the pier? Yeah. And I really wanted to learn and hear more about what you do and share it with my students. What are some typical unintentional assumptions, mistakes, phrasings that non-Tlingits make that you find disrespectful, so I can be sure to avoid those during our in a discussion here?
I think they come from a different area and they don't know anything about what the totem pole represents. And so it needs to be explained to them that that what the totem pole represents is clan crests and stories related to that. And there, somebody had mentioned something about rivalries. What you, I, I finally told him, I says, well, what do you what do you call the Mason-Dixon line? And so, I mean, that's rivalry, right?
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about
Go back.
yourself and how you got into carving? Was it mostly to tell stories? Is that why you started? Or
Uh, when I first got started, I was challenged to do a small pole. I said, oh man, how is anybody going to make money doing this kind of little tiny pole about yay big? But I thought it was pretty good because he asked me to do it. And so I copied what he did. I used his tools, and his tools was a pocket knife. And that's where I got started. I was preparing for fishing, and I was working on somebody's boat that was in on a grid. That's at the high tide. They let the tide go down. And they put the boat on the grid, and then clean the crud off the fishing boat. And I was looking forward to fishing. And as it turns out, I ended up getting pneumonia, and then I end up coughing up blood. And then I showed the doctor the handkerchief that had blood on it, and he ended up immediately getting me sent to Mount Edgecombe Hospital. In the hospital, I ended up continuing that little bit of carving with stuff through occupational therapy, little tiny poles, and then I I started carving all these little tiny poles and displayed them in a showcase in the hospital. And I put prices on there. It wasn't very much, just something, for the time that I put into it. So when after 54 days, they told me I didn't have tuberculosis. I was all excited and I was running down the hallway to pick up my clothes. I told the nurses that I put a price tag on underneath the little totem poles that I did. And then I was being sent to Juneau, then up to Haines. But in Juneau, I ended up doing paint Winsor Newton paint set. And so I thought I'd start doing painting. I said, wow, I could be able to do this kind of thing. So that's what I did. And I started doing portraits. They came before the totem pole idea, and I was pretty happy about doing them. And in Haynes, I was running out of frames for these paintings, so I figured, well, I'm going to have to do something else. So that's what happened.
So
And
did you end up painting those small totems you had made, those small poles you had made, or did you start painting poles later when you made big ones?
no, they were unpainted. I kind of liked the unpainted deal because they look pretty good.
When you're carving poles, you've got wood that's curved, and I think it's hard enough sometimes to draw curves on flat paper. How do you, are there any tricks you have to carving curves onto a curved surface?
Uh, well, a lot of the Northwest Coast art is flat. And so when it came to doing something round, it's pretty easy to use the eraser if you make a mistake.
Mhm.
So I didn't have any problem with that.
So you usually draw on the poles before you carve them then?
Yeah, yeah, I do a little tiny sketch and then I start carving. Uh,
Now, totems are typically carved out of cedar, correct?
well, yeah, this is yellow cedar that was left there in the hospital. So
And what about your carvings now? Is it still yellow cedar or do you use red cedar?
I use red cedar.
So where do you get for the poles you carve now, where do you get the wood from? And is it tough to find a big enough piece of wood that's similar throughout and consistent to carve?
Yeah, around here there's plenty of cedar
So
here.
are there any good tricks for identifying a good log? For somebody like me that doesn't carve, how do you know it's a good log? Like when you look at it, what can you see that I may
Well,
not know that says
first of
that's a
all,
good log versus
yeah,
one that may not be as good?
first of all, the sides of it, there's no little knots or branches sticking out. And I've been using logs just on the ordinary, knowing how to plug them up and all the knots and stuff. So
So if you
pretty
don't have a good log or you find out a log isn't that good after you get the bark off, sometimes you have to plug up the knots.
yeah, there's no problem in plugging up those knots.
But how does the wood change as you carve in, and does that create any problems or challenges?
Well, we've had a log that was pretty bad. We went ahead and did it, and I mean, you could smell a little bit of mold on it,
Mm.
and so we just went ahead and did it, and because time-wise, you're against weather, snow and stuff, working while it's colder in the Dickens. And so we just go ahead and do it.
When I went to the Saxman Village, I saw your workshop, I think. Do they have dehumidifiers in there to help prevent mold, or is it just natural airflow?
They have a ceiling fan, I think, that's all.
Yeah,
Is that what helps keep it dry so the logs don't mold?
There's a wood stove.
yeah, but we end up working on it while it's wet. And so it's once it starts drying, it starts getting hard.
Oh, and probably brittle as well.
Yeah.
So
So
what are some of the kind of tools you use for it? You mentioned when you're in the hospital, you used a pocket knife, but for a big log, I don't imagine you're using a pocket knife. Um, what sort of tools do you have for that?
yeah, on a big log, on a regular, use just whatever you can be able to get. We use chisels and gouges. And, since it's wood that we're working with and mallets, that's what it takes.
Have you ever kind of made up your own tool that you could use to make things easier? Or is there some sort of tool you wish you had that would make life easier?
Well, there's one type of tool that we end up using, and it's an electrical chainsaw.
That kind of makes me wonder that you use electrical chainsaws, because sometimes I think of here in Ohio, we have wood carvers that are Amish, and they're not allowed to use certain tools to stay with tradition. Are there any rules as far as what makes something an authentic, like Tlingit carving, that you have to follow?
Yeah, there's an ADZE, ADZE, that we use, and there's varied sizes, and some of them are commercialized type tools that boat builders used. And so with that, we can be able to whack away. And my understanding of it is that you use the weight of the tool, and they're big tools. You use both hands. You start off and you try to control it as it's coming down and taking a little chunk of wood off.
So what is your favorite type of pull to do? You mentioned a lot about telling stories.
Yeah, one particular poll that I did, it had a clan leader or chief on the top of it, and this was done for Anchorage. And the theme on it was opening the box of wisdom. Oh, what? Come on. And so I had to sit down and think about what in the world I was going to draw. And it occurred to me that being traditional, the elder is the person that has all the wisdom. Okay. He's been brought up traditionally, and he knows all this background also of the other clans. So because he's been involved in potlatches and so on, and he knows what takes place. And so that is the top figure of this particular poll. Then below that is a nephew. Now, the nephew is the person who carries on the tradition, passed on all the understanding from the clan leader or chief. Then I have in between his legs a bentwood box, opening the box of wisdom. And he is holding up the box cover that the chief is standing on.
Mm.
That story. Okay. Then below that is two clans, eagle and raven figure. Then below that is the children, eagle and raven.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the figure with the amount of space on that pole. It worked out just right.
So as we're getting towards the end here, sorry this went longer than I thought it might, but I've enjoyed hearing the various stories. Is there anything you want to share with my students if they want to learn more about First Nations artwork, or any resources or anything important things you'd like them to know?
Well, first of all, one of the things that is probably the easiest way is getting books on Northwest Coast art.
Well, I think anything that was put out by a museum or a university is probably going to be better than somebody that's just writing a little handbook for tourists.
Gotcha. Well, with
Yeah,
that, I just want to thank you so much for your time. We got to hear some of the history and storytelling, which is obviously social studies and English. We talked a little bit about the math and science and engineering behind totems. Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to share with me or my students?
I think Bill Holmes' book, Northwest Coast Indian Art, Bill Holmes' book, An Analysis of Form, is excellent for
Yeah,
learning about the form line design, which makes up Northwest Coast Indian art.
yeah, he is a key person on two-dimensional art and doing research. And he was a real great artist.
There's also the Emily, our daughter-in-law suggested the Emily Carr University of Art and Design. And also Alaska Heritage Institute puts out lots of really good materials, and they have a lot of classes.
Yeah.
Excellent.